Hello lovely people, I'm K3N and welcome to week 6 of our slow stitch along for 2024. Before I get into that, I just wanted to quickly apologise for Monday, week 5. I had a technical issue. When I uploaded the video overnight on Sunday, the next day it came online with permanent captions which couldn't be removed. So I took it off straight away and sorted it out, and then I had to drive up to the town hall and sit outside for 40 minutes and use their super fast Wi-Fi, because here where I live it takes me all night at least to upload a video that long. So many of you got notifications and then went to watch and saw that it was private. So I'm really sorry about that. I shall try not to make that same mistake again. Thank you very much for your forbearance. The other thing I wanted to just quickly show you was doing the English paper piecing last week. I haven't done it for years. I think it's probably at least 10 years really since I did any English paper piecing. And it got me back into it, doing that little piece for last week. So I made another little rice bag. I've shared it on Instagram already. And I just did 4 more English paper pieced hexagon rosettes and made another little rice bag. So that's that. And in it I've put my templates and some cloths. You can't see it now, I've put it down out of shot. Don't know if you can see, it's very dark here today, I'm sorry about that. I've put in some little cloths and templates and so on, so if I get the bug to make more, then I've got it all there ready. So that's that. So this week, week 6, the theme will be kind of dealing with those tricksy cloths. We all have lovely, well, many of us have lovely quilter's cotton type cloths which behave beautifully, which are lovely to hand stitch through. The thread count is nice. You can finger press a seam, you can make seams, you can collage them, they're not too thick. They're like the well-behaved child that does what they're told and never climbs trees or, skins their knees or spills their drink or anything like that. Lovely cloths. But then there are also other cloths that are beautiful and we want to use them, but they're too thick or they fray badly or they're too fragile or they're slippery. Those, I call them tricksy cloths. So this week I want to look at some of those cloths and ways of using them in your work while still enjoying using them rather than fighting against them. So, okay, so I shall turn you round, put you on the desk, you'll see my hands and we'll get into it. Okay, so I'm now at my desk. What I'm going to do is, I haven't planned anything in advance, I'm just going to make a little piece just to demonstrate ways of dealing with some of my own tricksy cloths. By the way, the word tricksy, many of you who maybe know Lord of the Rings will remember Gollum saying tricksy little hobbitses about Frodo and particularly Samwise Gamgee. Tricksy is also a word. I did look it up in the Oxford Dictionary, and the definition was that it's mischievous or using tricks to get what you want kind of thing. But I just like the sound of tricksy. You could equally call them tricky cloths, or I don't like to say difficult cloths. I don't know, tricksy cloths. I just think it sounds cute. So there's a little piece of cotton, the well-behaved cotton that I talked about earlier. I've got here a little stack and I'll just quickly whiz through them. Well, I won't whiz, but for me I'll whiz. This is just a bit of my woolly blanket, which is beautiful, soft, lovely, pure wool. But it's thick, so you wouldn't want to use something like that if you were going to make lots of layers. You certainly wouldn't want to be making a seam in it, probably, because then it's super thick. So the first thing is to examine your cloths, feel your cloths, get to know your cloth before you decide what you want to do with it, and then use the right cloth for the job, I suppose, rather than trying to force a square peg into a round hole, if that makes sense. So I thought my little piece of blanket is just the right size to fit on the page of my stitch journal, so I'll use that as a foundation. Because blanket's lovely, you can stitch into it, wool blanket, you don't have to go right through it. It has some substance to it. So there you're using the nature of the cloth to help you and make the sewing experience pleasurable rather than fighting against it if you use it as a foundation. Here I've got some sari silk, and I had loads of this. I bought it on eBay I think years ago, the whole sari. The thing with this particular silk, and with lots of cloths, not only silks, if you try and tear it, so say I take a little nip here to tear it, It's now going to behave. When I did it before, when I tried to tear it before, it tore the other way. It was probably just a plate. I'll see if I can make it do it here. Do you see? There we go. Now it's behaving. Now it's doing what I wanted it to do. Do you see how I wanted to tear there and it's tearing there? So therefore I would say to myself, well, instead of fighting and trying to tear the way I want to tear, I'll go with tearing it that way. So if I want a piece so big, I'll tear it there first, and then maybe you have to cut it. So don't go, oh no, it's tearing the wrong way, and panic and, you know, struggle and so on. Listen to what the cloth's telling you about what it wants to do and try and work with it. So I hope that makes sense. I've got that little bit now, so I'll keep that maybe for my, my little assemblage that I'm going to make. This is another kind of silk. This was a scarf that I bought in a charity shop years ago. And this as well, if I try to tear some of it, let's see what it does. I don't know. It's really hard to tear. Do you see? And when I look, I hope you can see, when I look there, what I can see that's happening is these threads that are running this way are pulling apart, but the threads that are going that way aren't tearing. So all I'm doing is just making a, I do it more so I can show you. Can you see that? Now that little bit there is see-through, you can see my finger through it. So what I would do with that little cloth is say, well, you don't want to tear, so I shall cut you, you know? You're telling me you don't want to tear, but I want a piece of you, so I'm just going to cut. I don't know why I'm cutting in such a strange way. I can turn it over and do it that way. And then if you wanted a nice frayed edge, instead of that cut edge, then what you can do is, so I'm just going to pull it back into alignment gently. Then what you can do is find those strands that are running that way from this end and just tease at them and pull them out, you know, a few at a time, or however many want to come. And just keep going until you've got enough fraying for your liking. And then if your frayed edge is then jaggedy, you just move the bin so I don't have to keep putting my arm across. If your frayed edge is then jaggedy, like up here, then you can just trim your frayed edge down. Like that. And that fluffy edge there is not pretty, so I shall pull that off as well. So it's really just a matter of getting to know your cloths, you know, and if a new cloth comes into your home, get to know it. Don't just try and make it be something it's not. There will be no point in me expecting this little scrap of fragile silk to behave in the same way as this piece of quilter's cotton. It just won't. It's not the same animal. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, for me as well, it's, you know, I would go as far as to say it's about respecting the cloth and its nature. And if I wanted to do something that required me to have a sturdier cloth that I could press seams and so on, then I will use this and not this, and not try and make this be something it's not. So I shall keep that little piece there. This little piece is a very, very fragile piece of sheet, very old sheet that I've indigo dyed. And it's very fragile. I mean, if I just pull that, do you see? I was just scraping the fluff off and it tore. So I wouldn't use this cloth in something structural, for example, if I wanted to make a bag or something, and, you know, patchwork with patches with a seam, and expect that seam there to hold up against that seam there. If I made a seam out of those two and stitched them together like that, this big strong butch quilter's cotton will rip this poor little worn scrap to pieces. So I just wouldn't use that for that. If I really, really wanted to use that colour and I didn't have any other options, what you could do is back that with another piece of cotton, just some plain sheet. You know, that's a bit thick, but some thinner sheet than that. So that if you put those two together like that, and you could do the invisible base to hold them together if you wanted to. So what you'd want to find is another cloth to support that made that unit the same thickness-ish as whatever you were going to join it to, so that the two cloths worked well as a team and you didn't have, you know, one dominating the other. and trashing it. How far can I push an analogy? We'll see. So that's, you know, a way of supporting. Some of you are going to say, and I'll preempt, because I know some people are probably going to ask about Vilene or interfacing of some iron-on interfacings. If you want to use those, then, you know, you go for it. You do you, as always. I don't use those. I don't buy them because they're plastic, you know, plastic-based polyester, and I just don't buy that sort of thing. That's number one. And the other thing is, it would change the nature of this piece of cotton to back it with some polyester. And the third thing is, in my experience, interfacing is not nice to hand sew through, and it makes the cloth stiff, so that you don't get, you know, when you stitch heavily like I do, you get that lovely ripple effect in the cloth. It affects that. It just, yeah. So I just don't use it. If that's what you want to do, you know, equally, if you want to back pieces of silk with Vilene to make them behave, then, you know, you do that. I'm just telling you, as always, what I do and what I like to do. This little piece here is from an old shirt of mine, which I wore for a long time when I was carrying my daughter, I think. I bought it in a charity shop, and it wasn't a maternity top, it was just a top that was way too big for me when I was my normal size. And it's viscose, which is a natural fibre, but it's produced by not very nice means. I wouldn't buy new viscose, but it was second hand. And it was quite a nice sleeveless top, but because I'd worn it when I was pregnant, I didn't want to wear it afterwards. So, plus it was way too big for me, so that's a scrap of that. And the thing with viscose also is, you know, it's sturdy, it will sort of work alongside cotton, it won't fight with it, but it's very difficult to press a seam. If you finger press a seam in cotton, oh, I've still got the sheet in there, have I? Oh no, I've got it double. There, excuse me. If you see already, just by me going like that, there's a nice sharp crease in it. So I can finger press a seam in that nicely, and that will lay flat. But in the viscose, although it is a similar weight, because of the way it's woven and because of what's happened to the fibres, you can't really, do you see there's a very faint crease, but it doesn't lie nice and crisp and flat like the cotton. So you could, you know, structurally it'll withstand a seam, and I would use that in a seam. I would seam it together first, like that, and stitch my seam. And then if I wanted my seam to lay open, I would then baste the seam afterwards. So I might do that as part of my piece just to show you. So that's viscose. This little beauty. This is some Japanese silk, and it's so fine. I hope you can see that you can see my hand through it. You see how fine it is? It would be a real shame to back that, you know, in my view, with interfacing. The beauty of it is in its translucency and its softness and its drape. So, you know, I really wouldn't want to do that to it. So what you could do is just go with its softness and stitch it on in a crinkly way. I might do that, let it crinkle and rumple. Or you could back it with something else complementary. And the other thing that I pulled out was this, which is also silk, but this is silk taffeta. So it's much sturdier, but it's still silk. And this was dyed with the roots of irises, flag irises, this brown colour. So, but if I put that behind it, I think it's much more, I mean, obviously you've lost the translucency, but it complements it much better in texture and also in appearance, because they're similar colours. If you didn't have other silk, if you say you'd bought a very sheer silk scarf, you can of course back it with a cotton or something. I mean, let's see how it looks if you put it on that. That's a bit white. And you can play with that even. You see that against the white shows a complete, it lightens obviously the whole thing because it's now against white as opposed to there on the brown. So, but there you're using the translucency of the cloth as a positive thing rather than saying, oh no, that's really fragile and see-through and it won't lay still while I sew it, so I need to iron something, sticky product that I'm not going to mention again to it, you know, to make it behave. You can back it with other cloths, natural fibres, and get different effects. And I might actually do something like that in my little piece to show the two you know, the two different effects I'm getting there. And straight away that's given me a design idea, if you like. The cloth itself has given me a design idea. And the next piece I've got here is it's cotton. The colour and the patterns on it are beautiful, but it's really thick and it's really high thread count. So it wouldn't be nice to do lots of hand stitching all over it to me. I've needled it. I've done my little trick of running an empty needle through it. But it's just really, I really have to push, and then it leaves quite a big hole. I don't know if you can see the big hole. So for me, I wouldn't want to do lots of hand sewing through that. It's too, you know, it wouldn't be a pleasant experience. But what I could do with that, because it's such a bright colour as well, again for me, is I could take, I buried my scissors under stuff, I could take a little snip of it, and there's another thing, do you see how it's rolled on the edges? I've torn it because I've torn such a narrow strip. You could of course take that to the iron and iron that flat, or you could say, oh, it wants to curl. Well, let's let it curl. Let it curl if that's what it wants. So I can let it curl up like that, and then I can lay that on my whatever, my assemblage or my piece of work, and I could couch that. Let's put it on something so you can see better. And then I could couch that on. So I'm using that beautiful cloth and its beautiful colours, but instead of stitching through it, I'm going to couch it, therefore stitch over it. So that's another idea for those thick ones. And then finally I've got loads of these. My neighbour gave me these upholstery swatch books, you know, so when you're going to buy a new sofa or something and you want to choose what they are. And they're all polyester, and they're really thick, but the colours are lovely. They're really nice colours, and if I wanted to use them in this kind of work, then I will just accept that I'm pretty sure it won't tear. Let's try, it could prove me wrong. No, I can't tear. Oh, hang on, you see. Well, there again, as it's tearing, I can feel that it's pulling through the weave. So there, I can tear it, but I'm going to tear it, need all my strength, mind you. There we go. A bit, little by little, and move my fingers along to support it as I tear. Let's just tear this whole strip off just to see how it looks. This is a video about me destroying cloth. So it's made this lovely little tufty fray. So that little piece of cloth has surprised me, because I kind of was not liking it because it was polyester. But now I've torn it, and now I feel like I want to tear the other side, but that's going to be challenging because I haven't got much to get hold of. Right, I'm going to stop tearing it now. So I'm going to, if I trim off some of those little bits that are longer than their neighbours. So yeah, so now that's quite a nice little strip of gold cloth. But again, as I've said before, I'd try it first. No, you see, that's really quite hard to sew through. So then I will design my stitching to suit, so I wouldn't put that somewhere where I want to do heavy stitching in both directions. I'll maybe just put a little piece of it somewhere and say to myself, well, I'm just going to put a couple of lines of biggish stitches just to hold it down. So I hope all that makes sense. So I'm going to get rid of all the bigger bits in the spirit of not having too much choice, and put them all away because I'm only going to make a teeny tiny piece. Now, no clue how I'm going to do this. I'm literally going to make it up as I go. The first thing I want to do is do something with this, because I really liked that with the brown behind and the white. Whatever you make this week will obviously be completely different, because you can go and look for your own tricksy cloths, whatever you've got. Choose the ones that you've maybe looked at and thought, oh no, I don't want to use you because I don't know how you're going to behave, or I think you're going to do this or that. You know, challenge yourself to get the pieces you don't want to get, if you see what I mean, rather than the nice plain simple cottons that you know how they'll behave, and just see what happens. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to just lay them on. I think I'm going to lay them on somewhere up there. Like I say, I'm just making this up as I go along. I have not planned this at all, so it might be a nice, it might not be nice. I'm not going to call it ugly. I got into trouble a couple of weeks ago for saying my piece was ugly. And then I'm going to get a piece of this and lay it over my foil patch. I think since it's the right width for the piece, I'm going to let it hang off the edge like that, and then I can maybe do something else there. I'm going to put a few of my teeny tiny pins, maybe just one in each square. And I'm not going to mind if it creases. If it creases and I stitch creases into it even, I'm not going to mind. I'm just going to let it happen. This is all about exploring the cloth, seeing how it behaves, and seeing if I like to work with it this way or if I need to come up with another solution. Now I need some thread. Now I'm fancying using a gold because I know I've got that piece of gold upholstery. So I think I might use that gold. Some of that gold. I've put a twist in it. This is what I do with my threads. This is from, I did a 2-part tea dyeing video if you haven't seen it yet. So these were too bright for me. These were just 6-strand embroidery threads that were too bright, and I soaked them in tea in that video, and these are the results. And then I lay them out in their little skeins to dry because somebody asked me. Here's some I haven't wound yet. They're fresh out of the tea. I just lay them out like that. I lay them on a tea towel or something, you know, downstairs in the kitchen, which is the warmest room. And then when they're completely dry, utterly and completely dry, it might take 24 hours, then I wind them around these lolly sticks. I don't wind them around while they're still damp because, number one, then they get kinky, you know, they get really, it's like when you used to put your hair in rags, if ever you've done that when you were a little girl. I can remember doing that, and my mother doing it for me, wrapping my hair around rags. So then the next day it was all ringlets. You didn't sleep the night because it was so uncomfortable, but you had beautiful hair the next day. Right, so I'm going to do I've taken 2 strands because that's my habit, but now that's another thing you can consider. Obviously then, what thread will you stitch with? If you're using a very fine cloth, then maybe 1 strand of thread is better. You could maybe even say if you had silk thread, the only silk thread I've got here is quite thick. If you had a fine silk thread, maybe silk with silk will work better. I think I'm just going to go with 1 strand of embroidery floss, which then means I can take a finer needle as well. If I can find one in here. You know, rather than my size 8 embroidery needle, which is what I normally use. I think that's a 9, or it might even be a 10. Can I thread it is always the issue. Yes, I can. Yay. So that's, you know, that's another thing to consider with your tricksy cloths. What kind of thread and what kind of needle do you want to use? Or do they want you to use, if you look upon it like that? What am I going to do? I think I'm just going to stitch round just inside each square. I think I'm going to do that. I'm just going to start somewhere in the middle. And this is, I would never have worked like this at one point. You know, this is a sample for my book, so it's not a big major thing. But at one point, previously, in my previous life as a normal quilter, I would have wanted to plan the piece down almost to the last stitch. Lay everything out, choose all the fabrics, decide what's going where, and you know how much of it, and all that kind of thing. That is how I used to work, and that's absolutely fine. You know, I worked like that for years, and I enjoyed it for years. But when I became more of a slow stitcher, now I find that I much prefer to make things up as I go along. The phrase I've heard used is intuitive design, which is basically making it up as you go along. And for me these days, I find I'm engaged much more with that process, because when I used to plan quilts on paper, even, you know, make drawings of them, or I even had one of those computer programs, can't remember what it was called now, Quilt something, electronic quilt or something, where you could even, you know, put fabrics in and say what fabric you were going to have where. And after you'd done all that, you ended up with a picture of the quilt you were going to make before you even made it. Then the actual making of it became not so interesting anymore, because all the fun part was done in the design process, if that makes sense. That was, you know, that changed for me. And I found in the making then, I just wanted to get the thing made so that I could move on to designing the next one. So that's when I graduated over to, or I gradually evolved over towards more making things up as I went along, or intuitive design. So clingy, this fine silk. And all those little hairy bits that hang off the edge want to get snagged. But you just have to be patient with it. There's, you know, products that stop things fraying. Well, that wouldn't be for me because I like fraying. But it depends what you're doing, of course. I mean, it's not that it's wrong to use, I think it's called fray check, things like that. But these days I'd much rather, if I don't want something to fray, then I'll use something that doesn't fray, rather than trying to make something that does fray, not fray. Does that make sense? Again, I'm absolutely not saying that it's wrong to do that if that's what you want to do. I'm just trying to show you another way of going about it. And here as well, what I'm also liking, because I've just done one line of stitch around the edge and left the middle unstitched, is the layer is still visible, you know. You can still almost see the gap in between the two cloths if I got my big fat fingers out of the way. I like that as well, so it's keeping that sheer nature of the cloth. So I hope I've made it clear that I'm absolutely not saying get some woolly blanket and some sheer silk and, you know, all the other bits that I've got. No, it'll be much more see what you've got that you might think is difficult, or not difficult, but, you know, more challenging to work with, and see if you can come up with some ways of using those cloths in such a way that you enhance the beauty of the cloth rather than trying to fight against it. So I'm anticipating this week that, a little bit like when we did diversity a couple of weeks ago, and everybody, or many people, came up with completely different things to the cultures that I represented. And it's so lovely to see the diversity in the work. So because we've all got different cloths, I'm anticipating that this week will be the same, that there'll be a great variety in the pieces of work. And I hope you like it, and I hope it's not, oops, I didn't want to come through so far. I hope it's not too without me telling you do this, do that. But last week we had the English paper piecing, which was quite, what's the word, prescriptive. And I like to mix it up a bit, because the English paper piecing, many of you were, oh yeah, I know this, you know, I can do this, I've been doing this since I was a little girl, this is playing, what do you call it, right into my wheelhouse, right into my comfort zone. And some of you had never done English paper piecing before, and, you know, many of you are completely new to stitching, which is lovely to see, actually. So it was really nice to see that contrast between people who were seasoned EPPers, English paper piecers, and people who'd never done it before. And many of the people that had never done it before loved it, and some didn't like it. And see, I'm quite liking that there. But I know I'm wondering, do I put it over the top of the sheer, or let's try it. I haven't cut it off yet, although I think I probably will, although I may not. Or underneath. Now, do you know what I'm liking? I'm liking it underneath with some on top down here, so you can see both of it. And I'm hoping then, again, because this was not lovely to sew through, that this is so gossamer-like that it's not going to make this too thick. Another reason why I like to leave it, even the pins are hard to get through, where I like to leave it coming down here, I might trim it somewhere, I'm not sure yet, is because otherwise I'm going to make a line here and then start here, and then it will be a work of two halves, and I always like to have some transition from one piece into the next. Right, so now I have to decide, do I put another colour in there, or do I just stick with the gold? Do I maybe use this darker gold? Maybe I'll use that darker gold. All these lovely tea-dyed threads, I might as well use them. Because with these little pieces as well, you can learn things that you can then apply, you know, to future projects of other kinds, or maybe bigger projects, or bags, or journal covers, or cushions, or quilts, or, you know, whatever else you might be going to make. On these little tiny assemblages, these little back cloths, you can practice. And very often I'm surprised, you know, I think, oh, that I'll try that, but I'm not sure I'm going to enjoy it. And then I do really like it, and I want to take it further. So I'm just wondering, I think I might do some crosses down there, just to hold that down. And now, do I want to do diagonal crosses or straight crosses? Shout. I love it when I say shout and then in the comments someone says, I shouted, did you hear me? And I say, yes, I did. I just love it. It's like, you know, obviously I'm filming this not live. I can't do live. I hope to do live one day when the internet speed improves. But it kind of feels like you are here watching me live. So I'm going to stab stitch. I'm going to go in and out. Apparently I'm doing diagonal crosses because of the thickness of it, rather than trying to go in and out in one movement. And actually it's not that bad, even though I've got the woolly blanket. You see, the wool, even though it's much thicker than this, because it's wool, it's much nicer to stitch into than the polyester. So it's not only about thickness, it's about the nature of the fibre, or even within a cotton. I have some cotton sheets that are much thicker, but the thread count's lower, so they're nicer to stitch than some of the thinner ones where the thread count's higher. And that's why, if you're unsure, the trying with an empty needle trick is the best way. See how this keeps wanting to do that as well? That's the nature of that cloth. So I think I'm going to pin it lower down here as well, rather than keep arguing with it. I'm just going to make it behave and stay put. There are gossamer-like threads that you can't hardly see, or I can't hardly see, laying on the surface, that come from the edge and go over there, and then they're getting trapped by the stitching. But just notice it, it's happening, don't get cross with it. It's just, it is what it is. And if I want to use this beautiful cloth, then I have to put up with that. It's its nature. Oh, so it's happening again. There we go. I think I'm going to put one more down at the bottom there, which means I get an even number, and I always prefer an odd number, but maybe I'll have an option to put some X's going further down when I see what I'm going to do further. In fact, maybe I'll even leave my thread and needle attached while I decide what I'm going to do next. I'll just leave that attached. So yeah, I'm really liking how, let me get something that I can, this big long basting needle. Can you see the needle through? Can you see? Yeah, you see that there's space there. So there's like air in it. So you still have the effect of this fine silk. I haven't done my usual thing of stitching it madly all over. I just think it's nice that it's got that, it's foofy. It's a bit foofy. That's not a word, I don't think, but I think you know what I mean. Right, so what shall we do next? I wanted to do this, I wanted to make a little seam of it, didn't I? Maybe I will get some more of that Osnaburg. Got got this handy bit pre-torn. Nice cotton. And just put that with that. And then I'm just going to feel that in my fingers with the viscous and see how I think. I'm sorry, I don't know why the radiator keeps making sounds. I hope it's not annoying. Especially if I fold it double and compare that to that. Now this is, it's too thick. It's way thicker. So I think I need something thinner even than that. Did I have something here? Thin. I'm off camera, I'm in the back of my stitch journal where there are some little scraps. I'm just looking to see if there's a thinner bit of sheet. And that feels better. So if I fold that in half, yeah, that's much better. Still slightly thicker than the than this viscous, but I think it's better. So I'm going to, what am I going to do? I don't know. I don't know. Tell me. So I want to put a seam here and here. First thing, I'm going to get this the same width as that. I don't know if this will tear. I'm about to find out. It's doing it. Yes, it will. It will. I just needed to put a bit more gumption into it. You see how it's gathered where I've torn? Because it's pulled on the threads running that way. Just put it gently back into place. And actually there it has gone really thin, probably because it was so old and worn. So, I mean, you know, that doesn't bother me, and certainly not for this piece, but if you had a bigger piece of this that you wanted to use in a bigger project, it's maybe worth doing a little experiment at one side to see if it tears and makes it, you know, not nice, and then you can cut it instead. But I don't really mind that that's torn, especially not since I could use the other end. Oh no, I will use that. I use that end. So I just want to stiffen him up a bit with some, give him a bit of backbone. I'm going to tear a bit of the old sheet. And so now I'm just going to put those together and pretend they're one cloth. Oh, they've come out of shot. I do apologise. I'm going to pretend they're one cloth. And then I want to stitch them to this piece. I've done it wrong, haven't I? Were you shouting? Were you shouting? It's the other one. It's the other one. It's not that one. Those two together as if they're one cloth. I could edit that out, but you know, I keep it real. Keep it real, people. Keep it real. And then I'm just going to flip him over there, right sides together. And I'm going to get something to sew him together with. There's not enough of that. I might use this. I'm going to use this. It's in the needle. It's handy. It's long enough, I think. It's actually a bit of that silk, but and you could pin it and get an accurate seam allowance and all that, but I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna. I'm just going to sew a seam. Just running stitch. I'm not doing the 2 steps forward, 1 step back thing, which apparently is called putting in a locking back stitch. You know, that piecing stitch, I showed it. When did I show it? I showed it in a video recently. When you take 2 stitches along, forward, and then a back stitch. Apparently that the correct word for the term for that is a locking back stitch. Right, so I'm to the end. It didn't take more than a couple of seconds. Just do a couple of back stitches to secure. I hope it didn't go blurry up in your face. So now I've got a seam, but I've got the viscous. Now you see there, if you wanted your seams going to the side, that wants to go that way, because this is slightly butcher because of the 2 layers. But if you said to yourself, well, I don't want them to go that way because maybe when you turn it over you could see through. Well, actually I can't. I can't see through. And I think since this is slightly thinner than this still, that's maybe not a bad plan to have the seam going that way. Also, it means I'm not putting a fold into this fragile cloth, which might make a weak spot. So yeah, so what I've decided, you heard my brain going, is to let the seam go where it wants and not try and force it the other way. Why might I force it the other way? Or maybe if this was see-through and you had an ugly shadow of seam showing, then I would make that seam go the other way, like that. And then I could decide, do I want to make it an open seam, you know, with one seam going one way and one the other, like that. Does that look better and lay flatter and so on and so forth? And if that was what I wanted to do and the seams wouldn't stay, then I would do the invisible baste along that seam to hold it. In fact, I think I'm going to do that anyway. I'm going to do the invisible baste. I'm hoping it's not blurry. So you take a teeny tiny back stitch, and obviously if you matched your cloth to your thread or your thread to your cloth, you really would hardly see it. And a slightly bigger stitch on the back. Because this thread is so fragile, the cloth is so fragile, do you see there where it's coming apart? I'm going to take more than 2 or 3 threads. It needs maybe 4 or 5 threads. Otherwise it'll just pull through and then forward, like that. So that's another thing to notice. What if you're doing an invisible baste or any kind of stitch? How is the cloth reacting to your stitching, and do you need to make a modification of some kind? Cloth talks to you, if only you'll listen. And I'm going to turn it around. See, so that seam is now basted down nice and flat. I'm now going to baste down the other seam on the viscous. So you come through to the back. I think I might put a pin in it because you see it really doesn't want to lay down. It really doesn't want to. I'm just going to put a pin somewhere halfway. Because what I don't want to do is stitch along and then come to the other end and turn it over and find that I haven't caught the seam with you all watching me. See, it's really soft and slippery to handle, that viscous. So it is possible that I might have made the decision to back that also with some sheet just to stabilise it a little bit. But I think since it's going to go on the blanket, it's not necessary. There we go. And that was that bit where I tore it, where it went all out of shape and got pulled apart. I'm not going to worry about that now. I'm going to finish off with the back stitch. I'm just going into the seam allowance and not through. Even though it's a sample, you know, doesn't mean you don't have to pay a little bit of attention. I'm going to cut that off. And you'll see as well that I didn't cut the pieces to size. All I've done is make my seam and kept the pieces, I cut it to width so they matched. So now I can decide where I want it. And I know I want it under that bit of gold, so I need to get that pin out. And I can play about with the placement. I could say, actually I want it right up there. I'm not sure I do, but I could put it right up there, and then I could put something over the join of some kind. I've got my bit I thought of couching on. Not sure about that. Or I could, how does it look if I turn it the other way and put that under there? Oh no, actually I do quite like that, because what I like is now there's just that one shape showing. But do I then put it lower? I think I'm going to do that and put the pin back in, because I just like that one shape. It's just pleases me, rather than, you know, all that rest of it. So if I just cover those up, I'm much happier with that. I'm going to go for that. I've also seen that I'm already over the hour. I don't know where the time goes, honestly. The time just flies by. I'm going to tear them one at a time. Again, this fragile piece, do you see can you see that I'm holding my finger and tearing against my finger? Because I know if I don't support the piece I want to keep, and when I get to the end I'm going to cut those last couple of threads. Otherwise I think that would have ripped, not in a nice way. I'm going to cut that as well, just only a short length, and it's only the undercloth. And the viscose I'm going to cut as well. I'm going to turn it over, not cut my thread, and cut it on the back. So then I can use my blanket as a guideline. There we go. And I'm going to carry my crosses on down, I think. Into that bit of gold upholstery thread cloth. Okay, so I've done quite a lot of stitch. I stopped the camera because it was, you know, it's getting very long. So I've stitched all that down. I just did lots of running stitches up and along. It's another thing with these fragile cloths, the more stitching you put in, the more support you give them. And I just wanted to show with this piece of sari silk an alternative to making a seam. You could actually seam it onto the piece. So I'm going to leave a little bit of overlap because I want to be able to tuck it under here when I'm done. And I'm probably going to put some pins. And so I've put it, there's no right side, but I've put it, if it was a cloth with a right side, I've put it right side down. And pinned it into place, and I'm just going to stitch along here as if it was a seam through the whole piece of about ½ inch, somewhere between 1/4 and ½ inch. So this is kind of seaming in place. I've done this on old quilts that need mending as well. You know, if you needed to go over a patch that's worn with a new patch, you can just seam into the actual quilt in this same way. It's quite a nice mending technique. So you seam it all around, and then the last seam you can't seam anymore, and I'll show you what you do, because obviously you can't, unless you could shrink yourself down and get inside the quilt. You have to sew the last seam slightly differently. So once I've stitched that down, I'm going to finish off. And cut my thread. Get the pins out. Hope I'm in shot. No, I'm doing the naughty thing again. So now I'm actually just going to trim it to the right length. Over there. So now I just flip it up, and then there where I've just stitched is in principle a seam. So now I want to have another seam the other side, so I would tuck it under to wherever I want, like that, and I might trim some off because that's wasting quite a lot, so I might just trim off not very straight, but it's got me a little scrap. So then you just turn it under and line it up where you want it to be, fiddle about till it's where you want, like that, and then put some pins in. Come here, naughty pins, they're getting sunk in there. Now I want to tuck that edge under there if I can. Can I? I can't. I might just leave it like that. I don't mind. I don't mind. So you can imagine if you're applying a patch to a worn quilt, for example, you can do on 3 sides of your patch, you can do like I just did there, And then the fourth side, you just literally, you turn it under, and then you just, in fact you're doing a plique. You just do a little blind stitch or whip stitch all the way along that other edge. But in this case, because it's this sari silk that's quite fine, it's actually a good way of doing it rather than trying to hold it, you know, right sides together with another piece of cloth and make a normal seam, because you've got all the structure behind of your, or in my case, my bit of wool blanket and all the other pieces I've already put on there. And this is quite a pale pink. You can imagine that if you had a colour that matched better, that the stitching would hardly be visible. But yeah, so that's, you know, in this case it's a way of using this quite fragile silk and putting in what looks like a seam. Knots are not helpful. But also it's a technique that you can use for patching onto things if you want a turned under edge rather than a raw edge. And I might explore that in more detail in the future at some point, doing things like that. So I should get rid of that pin to go through to the back. And it's a bit of a mishmash of a piece, but actually I do quite like it. You will be happy to hear. And so the final thing I wanted to do, I think I'm just going to leave it like that again, because it's, although it's very tempting for me at least to stitch like mad into that, I quite like it that it's, what was my word? Floofy. Floofy. And so I've got this bit of pink in here. I think I'm going to use, so I've got my little strip of cloth that I decided was too stiff for me to sew, if you remember, and it rolled when I tore it. So I'm going to just roll it even more, just by twisting it. And then I think I'm going to just do, I'm not going to mark and measure a circle, I'm just going to do it. And I think that will just tie nicely in. I might put a pin just to hold it in place. If I can get a pin through. And I'm just going to carriage that back to the beginning. And I think to anchor those two ends I'm going to do a cross stitch. So I'm going to jump all the way across there and go down over the two ends. And then I'm going to come back up over here somewhere, the other side of this end, go over a minute and see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to cross the two ends in the other direction, which means I'm going to come in there somewhere. I think basically just holding those ends down to get the pin out, see if they stay. That would be the very good test of it, wouldn't it? It's staying. So there we go. So I shall finish that off on the back. And that is my little tricksy cloth piece. I don't know if I'm going to write tricksy cloths in my book or whether I'm going to write something a bit more arty, like listen to the cloths, or I don't know what, something like that. I can't decide. Obviously you can write what you like. Let's get my page. Maybe I will just write tricksy cloths. Let's put it the right way up. But actually I do like it. You'll be happy to hear. Now, what do I need to sew it on with that I've never got ready and I always have to go and get? Ta-da! I put it in under my biscornu so I wouldn't forget it. A lady did suggest that I could pin it into my book ready. That would be, you know, very sensible, far too sensible for me. Excuse my arm. Or look, it just slots behind that bit of stuff. See, I've also got a secret pocket there. That's cool. That's cool. And another lady suggested that when I sew it to my book, if I start here and go that way, it might be easier. So I'm going to also do that. See, I'm learning so much from you all. It's a two-way street. What am I going to use to sew it on with? So I use this bit of gold, just long enough. So let's see if this is handier to stitch from this, because I have been stitching from there towards there, but then it's awkward when you get near the spine. So I thought, can you see? Yeah. But I'll try it the other way around. Make sure I've only got one page, the usual thing. Come up. And then into the paper we go. I'm not sure it's less awkward, but it's getting the awkwardness away at the beginning at least. Oh, actually it probably is less awkward. What's happened now? I haven't gone into the paper. I'm going to have to step stitch. It is quite thick with the blanket as well. Back round, I'm sorry. And stitch from left to right. Yeah, going through the thick blanket and the paper in one movement does not work. Nearly there. So now I have to decide, am I going to write tricksy cloths, or am I going to write listen to the cloths? I think I'm going to write listen to the cloths. I think that's more in keeping with the things I've written so far. Come back through again. And finish off. I don't think I'll do a dangle, because I think there's enough going on already. There we go. Whoops. Now I've put that paper clip in there and I can't get it out anymore because it's catching under the... Talk amongst yourselves. There we go. Got it off. Put it back under the biscornu ready for next time. See? Secret hiding place. And get my pencil. And you know what? Do you know where we are? We're in the next month, aren't we? We're in the 5th of February. So 5/02/24. Under here I was going to write, or am going to write, listen to the cloth. And I'm going to write I'm going to sign it K3N and a little kiss. So there we go, that's week 6. Tricksy cloths, also known as listen to the cloths. I hope that was useful. I very much look forward to seeing what you come up with your own tricksy cloths. And thank you very much for watching and for your continued support and liking, subscribing and all that kind of thing. It means so much to me, and I look forward to you joining me next time for more cloth tales. Thank you. Bye bye.